Good. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alex Campbell. I'm with the Oklahoma SEA, but today I'm going to put on my chair of the S&E Task Force, the Students and Educators Task Force, and talk to you guys a little bit about reaching the next generation. During this presentation, we'll talk about the 3 most common questions Students and Educators Task Force receives. We'll then hear about an example of a successful student outreach program, and then the remaining time, which is going to be the majority of the time, will be an interactive discussion. And there's nothing more awkward than crickets at the end. So please, during the presentation, start thinking about some questions that you may have. I have to admit too that I have some plants in the audience too from the S&E Task Force that will also help pipe up and answer some questions and also share their experiences. But what is the Students and Educators Task Force? And hopefully you've heard of us before, but if not, the S&E Task Force is a part of the External Communications Committee of NCSEA. The mission of the task force is to promote structural engineering to students and educators in a way that will plant seeds of interest to accurately define our contribution to society and to encourage the development of those students who may be interested in pursuing a career in structural engineering. So how do we accomplish this? And what does that mean in kind of non-technical wording? Well, our fantastic group of volunteers help to provide a number of resources to our member organizations in order to help the process of student outreach become a relaxing and rewarding opportunity. Later in this presentation, I'll show you where you can go to find these resources on NCSEA's website. The S&E group also works on building relationships with other organizations and companies who have the same goal and are already successful planting the seeds of interest in structural engineering into the brightest of our next generation. And I just realized as well, I did not change the slide. So I apologize about that. That was supposed to be the slide that was on there, but no worries, you're not missing anything. So the most popular question for the S&E group is, I want to perform student outreach, but I just don't know where to start. And my first response is almost always, just make the leap. The hardest part of student outreach is just jumping over the edge and starting. It often feels overwhelming, stressful, and it's just tiring thinking about it. But it doesn't have to be that way. One of the best resources I found to address this was actually provided to me by Michelle Ryland, and she is the Internal Communications Committee Chair. And an organization that we often use is Discovery, and they came out with a fantastic 5-step approach on how to get started with virtual student outreach. If you'd like, I can share this article with you as well, but I'll give a brief overview of what it entails. Step 1 is just to ask yourself questions. What is your availability? What can you offer? Is it a one-time conversation? Is it multiple virtual visits? Is it maybe a longer mentorship arrangement? Have you looked for already published resources for activities and learning standards? Are you comfortable presenting alone, or would you like a partner? Step 2 is connecting with an educator. Based on our conversations with schools, we found that the school counselor is actually a great resource and is a way to really get plugged into a school district and see what that school particularly needs. Is it an after-school program? Is it assembly? Or is it just coming into a classroom and talking? Also, if you have children, you can reach out to their teachers and see if they're interested in you providing an activity or lesson. Step 3 is talking to the educator. A few questions to ask are, what are your rules in place? Do you need a background check? Are the schools still meeting virtually, or are they in person now? What STEM concepts are they currently studying? Or what's coming up? Do any students have disabilities you need to accommodate? Step 4 is probably the most difficult phase, and that's planning your visit. And it's usually the most stressful as well, but there's plenty of already established plans and resources that you can use, and we'll talk about that coming up here on the next slide. Step 5 is after your site visit. Share on social media if you're allowed to by the school. Or what I do is, oftentimes I don't like sharing photos of students, and so I'll put an emoji face over top of their face as I'm sharing it on social media to not give up their identity. But this is a great way for you to kind of show what you're doing, show NCSEA. Please post to our Facebook page, our Twitter page. Let us know what you're doing, and I'll tell you why that's important here in a little bit as well. So, are you looking for resources? Do you need help? You're ready to finally go out there and start doing student outreach. Well, of course, NCSEA is here to help you. And one way of doing that is going to NCSEA's website, clicking on the Resources tab and the STEM and Outreach page. Here, you'll find a list of different activities. We have a popsicle catapult, skewer structures, and also how to make ice cream out of Play-Doh. And that's kind of our fun play on concrete mix design and incorporating that into the classroom. And all of these also come with learning standards that you can present to the teacher and say, look, here's what you can take to your principal, let them know that we're doing an activity, and here's about 5 or 6 different learning standards that we're hitting to meet your curriculum. But NCSEA is not the only person out there, and we realize this. And so we partner with different organizations and different companies to try to bring more activities to our members. So a few out of very many are Discovery, Teachers Pay Teachers. We're also partnering with NSBE. And a lot of people have also brought up Engineers Alliance for the Arts, already being plugged into their current program. So why is it important to share what you guys do? Well, if you guys haven't heard already, because I know it's been mentioned on the few that I've been on, is the MOLA structural models and our partnership between NCSEA and MOLA to provide a discount to our entire membership. And so if you're looking for a 20% off, I did put the discount code there, but you can also find it on our website by logging in. And they've also been gracious enough to provide us with a discount code for school districts if they want to purchase their own kits or teachers, and you just replace the M at the end with S. So Seacom and Todd Brewood brought this to NCSA's attention by getting a grant to purchase some of these kits and give them to a school district. And this little seed and idea that Todd had really turned into something very large for NCSEA. He shared this story with Leo, and Leo came to the S&E task force and said, hey, how can we make this become national? How can we let other MOs know what we're doing? And it was funny, once we got into this, we found out that other MOs were already doing this. For instance, the SEA of Northern California already had something established that they were doing, and hopefully they were able to, I don't believe that they purchased the kits yet, and so they could use the discount code that we had, hopefully. But together with Seacom, SEAONC, and SEA of New York, the 3 of them, along with NCSEA, have already started creating a recommended workshop with MOLA. So together we're working on providing a workshop that we can then present to other MOs and say, hey, look, if you want to use these kits, here's a discount code, you can purchase them, your SEA can hold on to them, and here's how to use them and get them into the classroom. So just that little idea that Todd had about a year ago has really turned into something that we're able to get out in front of more MOs. And so that's why it's so important for the SEAs to kind of share what they're doing, and for us to kind of take that as NCSEA and be able to share that with our whole organization and get everybody involved, because it is the most rewarding thing that you can do, is getting out there and really touching the hearts of students. So with that, I did say the majority of the presentation, and we've got about 50 minutes left. So this will be a long interaction section, but based on last year's experience, everybody had a lot to say and they wanted to share their experiences, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And so, like I said, I did have a few plants in here because there is a lot of great things that NCSEA is already aware of that our local member organizations are doing, and we want to hear their stories. But there's also stories of people that we haven't heard from yet. And so we'd love to get your guys' questions, stories, and experiences. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you guys don't mind turning on your videos and your microphones, and let's just have a casual conversation about student outreach. And so I think I will call on Martina. It looks like she did unmute herself. Martina, do you want to give us a little update on what SEA ONC is currently doing?
Yeah, so me and Derek here in the call are part of the Public Outreach Committee through SEONC in Northern California. And back in, I think January it was, we started this collaboration with NSBE Junior, a local chapter of NSBE Junior here in the Bay Area, with these MOLA models. It's been a slow slow churn to create this program, but we've attracted a lot of volunteers from not only within SEONC, but also from outside. Some people in the construction industry were interested as well. And we have a pretty solid team currently working on developing this program. We are specifically working with a group of kids from I think 2nd through 12th grade, and they are broken up into 2 groups, 2nd through 6th, and then 7th through 12. And these are kids that have worked with or have been part of this NSBE Junior program for a while, but they've never been exposed to structural engineering as far as we know. So our role is to come in to this more pre-established program that NSBE Junior has, and try to incorporate something that will expose them to structural engineering. So that's kind of the premise of this collaboration. And we've been working directly with someone from NSBE Junior to try and make sure that the program that we develop is in line with what's expected and by the kids, and also make sure that we're not selling ourselves short or selling the kids short for what they could be exposed to and what they could be learning with this program. Has been really exciting. We meet every couple of weeks to keep tabs on progress, and the same week we meet every 2 weeks internally, and then also externally with NSBE Junior to keep everyone updated on progress. And we haven't had the workshop just yet. The idea is to have a dry run of the workshop in about a month, and then shortly after that we should be having this program go live virtually, probably at the beginning of June. But everything is still kind of in flux, but it's been really fun working with MOLA specifically. They've been really involved. We've had a few calls with them, with the founder, and they have been really helpful in giving us feedback, and also offering to be part of the actual workshop when the time comes. So yeah, overall pretty exciting. We look forward to actually completing the workshop and then potentially bringing it to other chapters of NSBE Junior.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing too. And I love that you guys are partnering with NSBE and their local chapter, and really taking NCSEA's call to action seriously as well, and the underrepresented, having them be represented in structural engineering. One thing that you said that I thought was really interesting, and I've run into this myself from my experiences, is a lot of students don't know what structural engineering is. So you really are teaching them for the first time what structural engineering is. And have you experienced that quite a bit with your outreach programs? Is the first step is just explaining what a structural engineer is?
Yeah, so especially the difference between us and architects.
Yes.
I think that's one of the biggest things that we're trying to change is just the perception of structural engineers in the general public. Even most adults might not even know what we do. So it's really been crucial to get this program running so we can expose the kids from an early age. And a lot of them, will, I mean, I didn't know what a structural engineer was until I was way into high school. So I'm hoping these kids will have a different experience, and we'll start looking at opportunities in our profession from an earlier age.
Absolutely. Yep. And it just takes somebody like yourself and the rest of your team over there too, just to make that leap and get out there. So we greatly appreciate everything that you guys are doing.
Yeah, and making it fun. I mean, a lot of these kids know what engineering is in general. They already have, specifically with NSBE Junior, they've been doing workshops with drones, anything to do with computer, electrical engineering. So they're well versed in that realm of engineering, but structural engineering is not as popular. So a lot of them haven't had that exposure, but we're trying to make this just as fun. And the MOLA kids are very interesting because we've all done the marshmallow and the marshmallow and stick activity, the, you know, a lot of these activities have been done over and over again, and they're fun, but I think maybe the kids will already have seen it, and the MOLA kits are actually built specifically for teaching structural engineering, and it's really impressive how well they are able to showcase structural engineering concepts with these little springs and magnets. We've had a lot of fun playing with the kids. We definitely got some for the team. And so we're excited to bring these to the kids and have them have some fun with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I know that I see a bunch of familiar names on here too. Before I have another one of my plants come up with a couple of ideas, I was going to see if maybe somebody that hasn't shared their story in the past may have something to share with us as well, whether it's a question or whether it's something that you're doing that NCSA isn't aware of yet. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. And so I think I'm going to call out on somebody else and see, Catherine, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. You guys are doing a lot of great things out there in New York. And so I know you guys just recently had a really fun experience. And I'd love for you to kind of share that and give that idea as well.
Yeah, we are currently targeting a slightly different age group. We do a lot of high school outreach and then also college outreach. So we've got a mix of activities that we do at these different age ranges. But what Alex was just referencing is we did our structure quest, which is kind of an event that tries to combine everything at once. So we have high schoolers, college students, and professionals all participating in a structural engineering scavenger hunt. This year that was done virtually because obviously a lot of things are virtual right now. And we did that by live streaming YouTube videos that ask questions for them to look back through their structure, like their selfies from vacations, to find different kinds of structures in their photos that they've taken of themselves. And then the second round was go out in your neighborhood and explore to try to identify different structures. So identifying like different kinds of masonry. So identifying brick versus CMU versus different things like that, but also just fun structures like, can you find a culvert? Can you find an arch bridge? Things that like different kinds of neighborhoods might have, because a lot of our students are all over the place right now. So we even had a couple students actually managed to get horse stables and a grain silo, which is not something that in New York City I was expecting students to be able to get. And then the third round, they came back and did a scavenger hunt via Google Maps. So we gave them a clue about a different structure in the world and they had to go visit it virtually in Google Maps and take a screenshot for us. We didn't have a huge amount of participation because I think it was a really beautiful weekend and I think people didn't want to be inside, but the students who participated had a great time. And it was nice that we had like a few high school students, mostly college students, and a good group of professionals, and it was a really fun time. We're also working on, in terms of the MOLA outreach, I'm currently working with a high school in the Bronx here in New York to incorporate structural engineering into their forces and interactions module, because part of their school's initiative is showing real world applications of each module that they learn. And forces and interactions is a great place for structural engineering to slot in. So I had a session sitting down with their teachers in their physics department and talking about how you can extend free body diagrams to drawing a beam, to drawing a bridge. And then at the end of their sessions, I'm going to do a demonstration with the MOLA of, again, virtual, going to live stream myself playing with the model, and they're going to have like the toothpicks and marshmallows this year. Maybe next year I'll be able to be in school and we can do that hands-on with actual kits. But they're going to be able to watch me play with the MOLA model and then build themselves with the materials that they can have on hand at home. So that's kind of a little sampling of the stuff we do. We also do panels and resume workshop stuff for college students. We currently have 3 main student chapters. We also outreach with an additional 4 schools. So we're pretty busy over here in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing too that I found really interesting is you said that you're working with a school in the Bronx. How did you make that connection and start? Because getting that activity and doing that is certainly a lot easier after you've already made that initial step. How did you guys go through that process of finding a school that could use you guys?
Yeah, that particular school was a connection I already had, but we did a presentation to 160 high schoolers as well as their teachers through the Department of Education here in New York. I think New York has something like 500 public high schools or something ridiculous. So these were high schools that particularly have a career and technical education department. And they were hosting different panel series talking about different fields of engineering. So us as CONE did a presentation to those 160 high schoolers, and then a lot of their teachers have reached out to us to try to work on things going forward. So I think we have connections probably with 6 high schools right now, and we're starting with 1 to kind of figure out what that can look like that we can offer to other schools. But that's an ongoing thing that we managed to connect through essentially like the district level to different schools that would have interest in that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. And again, we really appreciate everything that you guys are doing out there in New York, and really carrying on the student outreach is just fantastic. And so I'm going to try to open it back up again before I get another one of the plants to speak up, and see if anybody, if you are currently doing outreach or if you aren't currently doing outreach. And so a few people have their cameras on. And so if you do student outreach, whether it's through your SCA or whether it's by yourself, Oklahoma SEA, we currently don't have a specific committee or anything like that for student outreach, but I personally do student outreach twice a month just on my own. And so if you do currently do some type of student outreach, would you just kind of raise your hand on the video, and so we can kind of get a feel for who out there does do student outreach? And it looks like we've got a pretty good mix. A lot of people do have their cameras off, which is fine. But if you do want to turn it on and say hi, that would be great as well. And then I'll try to take a look here at the chat too here in a little bit. So if you aren't currently doing student outreach, is there anything that's stopping you from going out there? Is there a question? Is there anxiety? Is there stress around making that leap that maybe we could help you out with?
I can kind of speak to that. I think one of the nice things about this program that we're working on in SEONC is that Nesby Junior already has a program in place with a set group of students who already know the ropes, and we're just kind of sliding in. And that makes it much easier for us to focus on actually developing a program. And reaching out to students can be difficult, especially since a lot of us have been out of school for a long time, or we don't, a lot of us don't have kids of the right age. So that part, I think, is the hardest, is that first step of getting in contact with a group of people or a group of students that are willing to do this. And I think that's probably the most difficult part.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so Michelle, I saw you unmuted yourself. You got something?
Yes, I've got some. I don't have a solution. I have a problem that Illinois is facing as well. But so the outreach that we do, and we haven't been that great about outreach during COVID. We're working on modifying some of our techniques for that, but we haven't really gotten there yet. Pre-COVID, a lot of our outreach was where another organization was hosting like a STEM fair during E-Week, for example, and they invited our organization to come exhibit. And so, that took place on a weekend, and we had usually had no problem getting volunteers out there to exhibit at the STEM fair. So we would have a couple of those scattered throughout the year. What we are trying to do, or what we're looking to do in the future as part of our DEI efforts as well, is to focus on getting into the schools, into the Chicago schools, and doing some sort of presentation there. The problem that I see is that that's during the week, right? So, and we're all volunteers. This is not part of our quote unquote paid job. And so getting people to, whether they have to take time off from their actual job to go do this during working hours to get into a school is a problem I see us running into once things get back to in person. I wanted to, I guess, pose the question, has anyone else come up with a solution to that, or it's just something we gotta figure out?
I know I'm going to jump in real quick. A minor solution, it would be company based. So 2 years ago, the company I worked at actually implemented a volunteer policy. So every year we get 8 hours that we can go out and do volunteer work. And I know last year, the year before, I spent some of my volunteer hours actually going and doing presentation to schools. So if that's a possibility and you think it might be something your company is into, you could always pitch it to them and see if you could swing something that way. It's not a whole lot, but I mean, depending on how many engineers you have, I mean, 8 hours each could go a long way. So.
And one other thing I'll suggest as well, that it doesn't completely alleviate this problem, but it is an issue. You know, taking time out of your already busy day, especially if you've got a deadline that creeped up on you and you've already promised to volunteer at a school. I've had that happen before as well. And so it is a problem. But one thing that I found to help alleviate that is a lot of schools are looking for after school programs that are educational instead of the kids just running around in the gym or out on the playground after school. And so I've actually been able to work with one of our local schools here that represents homeless students, is what their school is a private company or a private school. And what they have suggested to me is doing creating a STEM after school program. And so it doesn't start, that one's elementary school. And so they do get out at about 3 o'clock. And so I show up right around 3:15, and I can make up those hours within the week, and my company allows me to do that. But that's one thought to try to alleviate taking out a whole block of your day, or if you do it at lunch, you got to leave an hour early and then you get an hour late. And so that's been one potential solution as well.
Yeah, I mostly use my company's like flexible hours policy pretty liberally. Of like right before this call, I was actually helping out at a career fair on their engineering panel for a school here in Manhattan. And I will just accommodate that at the end of the day today, and I'll be able to hit my deadlines, and it works out okay. And the company's pretty flexible that as long as you still hit your deadline, they don't really care when you work. But I know that's not every company's policy. I just got lucky there. We do try to do, at least for college outreach, it's pretty flexible that college students are available after hours. So a lot of our resume workshops and activities like that, we actually do around 6 o'clock. So somebody could get off work, get home, or get to the school and be able to do a presentation that way.
Yeah, and something along those lines. I'm not sure how this will look like, you know, in the next few months, but having these outreach events virtually, I think has been good for getting more volunteers on board, because you can take a couple hours out of your day. You don't even have to go anywhere. You can just jump on a call. And I know in person it's way better. But if our goal is to reach more schools and reach more students, this might be a good way to do that without too much more effort. And that way you can actually do things during the day with students who are in when school is in session.
This is John Joyce. I'm a partial owner of a small consulting firm, and through NCSEA, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of people from, you know, some of the largest firms in the country, you know, all over the place. And I would just kind of say that, you know, to the idea of not making accommodations for an employee to participate in something like this, I think is pretty out there. If I would go so far as to say, if you're working for a firm, you know, everybody on this call is such a kind of valuable employee. If you're working for a firm that was not willing to make accommodations, it's sort of like, that would kind of be telling me something that in the long term, am I in the right place? You know, I feel that strongly that I'm not alone in thinking that this sort of thing is important, and there's a likelihood that if there's not a policy in place, and if you feel like Oh, I don't know. I guess I would say maybe it just hasn't been brought up. I really can't imagine too many principals not supporting this.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate that as well. And so, Michelle, hopefully that gives a couple ideas. I think you brought up a great point. I'm glad that we discussed it because I do think that's a nationwide issue of, how can we accommodate this? How can we, kind of get over this hurdle? One thing that stood out to me too in your initial comments was about partnering with other organizations. And I think that's a great idea. If they're already established, they've already got a program set up, just kind of plugging into that also gets your foot in the door for future things as well. What organizations do you currently work with or has Illinois worked with in the past that's been really successful?
So the big one that we do, Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a local school here, every Engineers Week in February, they host a STEM fair out at one of their suburban campus locations. And they have probably 100+ engineering association type organizations exhibiting there. It's super popular, very crowded, very successful. So that's the big one we do. Then there's, just various locations, like one of the suburbs out here would do like a science day in the spring and would ask engineering companies and associations to come exhibit. There was one, I'm forgetting all the names. There was the Chicago Wolves, which is not our, I'm not a huge sports person, but their hockey team, I think, and they were doing some sort of like exhibiting during one of the period breaks of the game. And so they invited all of these families to go attend the game. And then during the breaks, you could go around on the outside and there was all these tables set up. And so that was one outreach. So it's a bit of a variety, but what we've noticed is we've kind of been on the outskirts of the metro Chicago area, and we're trying to pull our outreach more into the city because, to be honest, that's where we're going to have more of a diverse outreach. That's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us too. And I think that'll help segue me into my next question is there's a ton of resources out there. And what we're currently trying to do is, from a S&E task force standpoint, is try to put together a list of different organizations that people can go to. And so I was wondering if you guys wouldn't mind sharing. In my presentation, I had a couple of them, Discovery. My wife is an elementary school teacher, so she brought to my attention Teachers Pay Teachers, which is really great. They've got worksheets that you pay $5 or less, and you get a whole activity. They give you instructions on how to present the activity. They give you worksheets that you can hand out. They give you learning standards that you can give to the teacher. And it's just a great resource for just a couple of bucks. And so that's one that I found to be very successful. But I was wondering if anybody had a go-to that they really like to use.
I think we've been torturing ourselves building from the ground up. If people are interested in, we had the scavenger hunt event, and we also did a hackathon style design competition for a infrastructure grade separation. So if people are interested in running those for high schools or college students, let Sione know, and we're happy to help you guys figure out how to run those.
Alex, we also have a question in chat about what grade levels should you target? You may want to address that.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And I don't think there's a solid answer on that. What are you passionate about? What grades do you like to teach? Are you too embarrassed to get in front of a high school classroom of 16 and 17-year-olds? Then maybe the second graders might make you a little bit more comfortable. Me personally, I really enjoy doing the elementary school students. That's been the most rewarding for me. And the biggest opportunity, since my wife is an elementary school teacher, I've kind of had that plug and have been able to go to her for advice of, hey, is this going to be too big of a word if I tell them this? And she's been able to give me that feedback of saying, well, you're talking to a 6-year-old, so, you know, talking about load distribution is probably not going to be the right term for you to use. And so that's been the most rewarding for me personally. But I don't think there's any one way to go. We have organizations that we've heard from that do elementary school like myself, that target middle schoolers, that target high schoolers, and even up to the college level. I don't know if anybody from Ohio is on the call, but they have had a very successful outreach program with their local universities and have been sharing virtually, giving presentations. And I sat in on one where they actually showed the software that they use for bridge analysis. And that was really fantastic for the college students, because I know during my experience in college, we touched on some different softwares, but we didn't see what they actually used in the real world. And so it was great to kind of get that feedback. And so I know there's a couple of other people on the call too that target different age groups. And I think Catherine could probably speak about high school students and maybe some of the rewarding aspects of that.
Yeah, I feel like college is really fun because that is kind of that moment where a lot of students are deciding what they want to do. Most high school students haven't really figured that out yet. So that's a time that feels very influential, that you can get them to know the difference between architecture and engineering and kind of steer them in our direction by talking about a cool project you're working on. And then it can, like Alex was saying, it can be a little intimidating. And I feel like I have to like do my research a little bit more, because they might ask a question that like I haven't thought about since I was a freshman in college, and I need to like make sure I really have something down so I don't like say the wrong thing. But I feel like it's a very satisfying age group, because they tend to ask slightly more nuanced questions, and they might ask you like, oh, how do you design a tall building for wind? And I'm like, that's an awesome question. I'd really love to get into that. And then I can talk to them about like that interesting stuff of how do we design lateral systems. And then we do a lot of college outreach, and those are, again, like those are students who already know they love civil engineering at the very least, and then we can get them into our structural engineering court by, again, just showing cool, interesting projects we're working on, or trying to make it interesting. Like we also did a event where we worked with one of the college student chapters, and they hosted a series of like teaching how to use SAP, which was great, SAP 2000. And there was also a seminar recently that they did about Rhino and Grasshopper. So really like cool tools to introduce college students to that they probably otherwise wouldn't have gotten to play with as college students.
Does anybody else have maybe some experiences with other age groups, or just want to share their experience about similar age groups? I have been neglecting the chat just a little bit, so I'll read a couple of things on here that Mike Glue with SEAOA said. Here, there in Arizona, they do an outreach by Mall Day and also host special events and sponsor the student competitions. So Mike, glad to hear that Arizona's up and running over there, and hearing that you guys are doing great stuff. I also saw Chad Mitchell from SEAC said outreach is marketing. That's an excellent point. And that could be a selling point too to your company if you're trying to look to see if they'll give you some pay time off, or let you do some volunteering hours, similar to what Kayla was saying, having 8 hours of volunteer time. And then 2 other great resources. Leo put a iit.edu.STEM Expo. I have not personally been there, but if it's coming from Leo, I know it has to be great. So go ahead and check that out.
Alex, that's the event that I mentioned, the Illinois.
Oh, the Illinois.
Yep.
Okay, cool, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Leo, too. And then another great one from Andy Vixman, Teach Engineering. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that one. I forgot to put that, and I would have put it into my presentation. I believe it is teachengineering.org, and they are very, very good at providing lesson plans for K through 12, providing a whole bunch of resources. And one thing that was a great aspect that structural engineers don't usually think about, but teachers do, is they've got to somehow incorporate your activity into a learning standard if you're coming in during the school day and not doing like an after school program. And so there's a little bit of extra work that that teacher has to do to try to say, hey, how does this fit into the curriculum? And resources like teachengineering.org, the resources on NCSEA's website, we provide these curriculums to you and say, these are the standards that we hit. And you can go and give that to your principal and tell them, hey, look, we're doing this really fun activity and we're going to be hitting this learning standard, this learning standard, this learning standard. And we're knocking out 5 things out of our curriculum in this one really fun interactive activity. And so teachengineering.org actually has some of those in there too. And it's really fascinating having those great resources. So highly recommend that one as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. One of the things that has come out of our discussions with our NSBE junior counterparts throughout these last few months is just how important it is to stay in line with what the learning objectives and the curriculum is with these kids. And so it's actually kind of difficult to align what we it's hard to clearly define these learning objectives within these workshops that we create. And it's been definitely a challenge, but yeah, it's something that's on the teachers' minds, even for these after school programs. In the end, it all has to do with what the students are learning and why it's valuable for them to take part in these workshops.
Absolutely. And a couple more things from chat too. Dan Fox with SEA OSC mentioned ACE mentorship, and Dan mentioned it's a great nationwide program to introduce high school students to the architecture, construction, engineering industry and get them excited about it. And I have not been a part of ACE mentorship, but that has been one that has come up quite frequently. And so it does seem like a great resource if you are looking to make that leap, make that jump, but are too afraid to do it by yourself. I believe they do have like a 6-week or 8-week training kind of program too. And so if you're afraid to go out onto your own, that's a great resource as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Has anybody had any experiences with ACE mentorship that they'd like to share?
Yeah, I've been involved for a number of years here in California, and it's been a pleasure working with high school kids. We go in once a week and sit with them for an hour, bring them a stack of pizza, and you know, we do things like bridge models, loading up bridge models with popsicle sticks and spaghetti towers, that kind of thing. And it's great to see them get excited about the industry. And I'll bring in some drawings from buildings that we've created within our office and get them a little exposure to the structural industry. A lot of those kids don't even know what a structural engineer is or what we really do. So it's kind of the first step here in getting that into their mind of hey, maybe this is a career path they might want to take, and get them to start thinking about career path at the high school level. So it's been pretty rewarding for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way that you said it too. It's been rewarding. It really is a rewarding experience once you get out there and do it. That is a common theme that we hear very, very often. Thanks, Dan. It looks like we've got a couple more in the chat too. But I did want to reach out to Kayla as well and kind of hear some of the stuff that they're doing in New Hampshire and try to get a little bit more of some real world experiences of what other SEAs are doing and possibly how your SEA could be doing something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have a committee solely for outreach. However, our young members group often does collaborate with local universities, usually doing resume reviews and mock interviews. And that's a lot of our interaction for S&E. I do know another member, Bob Durfee, and myself are really interested in the MOLA initiative, and we're really excited for that and think that would be a great way to go. I did see there was a question about how to get volunteers that aren't board members from your MO involved. And I think personal asking helps in that case, is reaching out and being like, hey, I think you would be great at this. You should consider reaching out. It's not that hard. You can go do it. This is how. And I think that's where having resources that give you the steps on how and what to do really help. For me personally, I was thinking about this, and I have a friend who's a 3rd grade teacher. And when she first started, she asked me if I wanted to talk in her classroom, and I was really hesitant at first and reluctant, and I was almost afraid to go talk to them. And I was like, no, I'm not really comfortable. And then a couple of years ago, I was like, sure, okay, let's talk to them. And I loved it. It was wonderful seeing their reactions and having their questions. And at that level, again, unlike Catherine's group that she has to prep for and all the nuances, it's pretty basic. And she is now in Vermont, so I do that virtually now because I'm in New Hampshire. So again, no travel time. It was this year, I think I spent 45 minutes on the call with her class, and she just streamed me live to talk to them. And I took their questions and answered them. And I think one of the most rewarding things is when she sent me a message a couple weeks later saying that one of the girls in her classroom wants to be a structural engineer when she grows up. So that was very rewarding. So still think New Hampshire could get a little bit more established in the outreach, but we're working on it, and I'm excited to see where we could go with it.
Kayla. And so we've got about 10 minutes left. And so I'll kind of want to close it in with maybe trying to hear about everybody's experience. And not everybody, this is true. I've talked to Angelina, who's the chair of the external communications, about how she got involved in structural engineering, and her story was completely different than my story. And so I think there's probably something in all of us on this call that sparked our interest in structural engineering. So I'll briefly share kind of my experience, what got me involved in it, why I started thinking about it. And then I'd love to hear about your guys' experience. Was it just someone reaching out to you, or did you kind of discover it on your own? For me, my family every year went to the beach, and we would always stay at a place called Golden Sands in Ocean City, Maryland. And it was about 30 stories tall, and the hallway for that was all open and just had a glass guardrail. And that's the only thing that separated you from the pavement down below and the door to your apartment. And I remember as a little kid going up, the pool, the indoor pool was up on the 30th floor. And I would be shimmying against the wall all the way along because I was terrified of going near that guardrail. My cousin, who was about 2 years older than me, was much more adventurous. And he would run along and he would jump and climb up. And looking back now, that was probably still the wrong thing to do. But it got me thinking, why can he jump on this glass guardrail and feel comfortable with not falling to the pavement below? And that really got me interested in the why. What industry, what structural engineer, and I didn't know it was a structural engineer at the time, but why is this still standing? Why is this safe? Why can, the public walk down these hallways exposed 30 stories up and not be afraid of falling below? And so that was my kind of introduction into structural engineering. But I'd love to hear if anybody else had an experience, whether it was someone coming in to talk to them in 3rd grade, or whether they just were in college and that was the only major that was being offered to them. So I'd love to hear if anybody has a similar story.
Just looking at the chat, it looks like a lot of people didn't even know what structural engineers were until high school or even college. And that was definitely the case for me. I didn't know any structural engineers in my family or anyone in my friend group. So it was kind of learning from scratch. And yeah, hopefully that changes for this next generation.
Yeah, similarly, like my family doesn't really have, definitely not any structural engineers or architects. My mom is an art teacher and my dad's a history teacher. But my grandfather was an agricultural engineer, which is essentially just a fancy farmer. But that was my only exposure to any kind of engineering, but I knew I wanted to do something like in a STEM field, but I wasn't really sure what. And I knew I liked cities. Like I lived in northern Indiana and we would take the South Shore line into Chicago. And I really liked like watching the city come into view. So like that was very important to me, even just like as an 8-year-old, but I didn't really have that conception of like, who is it that makes that city possible until I hit college and was like in this art of engineering course that kind of talked about each department in the engineering school for a week at a time. And we talked about tall buildings in New York, and it really caught my imagination.
Well, one of the reasons I asked in the chat about what age should we target is so that when the students that are thinking about going on to college, they can get the right tools in high school to go into engineering in college. If they know what a structural engineer is and that's what they want, then they know that they should take physics in high school.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think that it's important, and kind of hearing from some of you guys, it seems like a lot of people really didn't know what structural engineering was until they got a little bit too far down the road. And so to Jesse's point, the earlier that we can introduce structural engineering to students and even the educators, so that way they can teach their students what structural engineering is, the better that we can really make our community of structural engineers better and really get the brightest of minds into our industry. And so I greatly encourage you guys to go out. Not only is it rewarding to yourself to be able to share your experiences and your knowledge with our next generation, but it's also rewarding to them just to do something a little bit different and learn something new. So I greatly appreciate everybody being on the call. If there are any last minute questions, we do have about 5 minutes left, and I'll just leave it open to if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Otherwise, I appreciate all of your guys' interaction today. It's been a really great session with you.
I'd really love to highlight, Bethany dropped a comment in the chat about that their office hosted middle schoolers, and they went around to different departments to kind of talk about the different professions within the office to those kids. That sounds like a really cool program. Sione does that for college students, specifically like shadow a structural engineer, but I love the idea of doing it across a company that has multiple departments and doing that at that younger age where you can kind of hook them early. Bethany, could you say, like, that was in through your office, how did you get in contact with that school, if you don't mind, if you're still on the call?
I think the teachers actually contacted us.
And was that your
Do you know
individual?
how many kids?
It was like 40 or 50 kids just came walking in.
Wow.
And so we split them into like groups of, I don't know, 10, I guess, and they just kind of rotated between each area of our office where we had a presentation. And yeah, it just kind of turned into a competition, like, oh, they were all chatting about structural afterwards. Boy, Bethany, you must have really given a really good presentation. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, they've heard of architecture maybe like really early on. I mean, that's, I was really attracted to architecture whenever I was a kid. And I guess just having that in my mind early on, and I didn't know what a structural engineer was until like I was in college. But I knew I was really good at math. Like, how could you tie in the two? But yeah, I mean, if you can find that attraction to this profession early on, it'll stick in their mind.
And I'll share just one way that I've been successful with the younger kids and teaching them what structural engineering is as you go into the classroom. I ask them if they've ever heard of structural engineering, and I don't think I've ever had a hand raised for that one, unlike everywhere else where they raise their hands for everything. And so I start off by getting about 5, little bit larger students out of the audience, and I tell them to go, and I'm going to help them. We're all going to push on a wall. and we push as hard as we can. And it works best if you've got CMU or something like that there as well, instead of like a glass wall and getting your fingerprints all over everything. But we push on it as hard as we can. And I kind of joke with them and say, come on, guys, you're not pushing hard enough. Come on, really, we can push this wall over. And we start pushing and pushing. And of course, the wall doesn't fall down. And so I tell them, thank you for volunteering and helping out, and kind of ask them, I said, how come no matter how hard we push on that wall didn't fall down? And the kids will usually, shout out a couple of things. And I tell them, well, let's think about it. And if it's an exterior wall, this is even better, because I say, what's stronger than even the 5 of us pushing on this wall? And they kind of sit there and think, and you say, well, it's windy outside, right? And I'm in Oklahoma, so of course the wind is perfect. I say, it's really windy outside, right? And maybe the California people could experience this. And I say, we've felt a lot of earthquakes lately, right? Isn't an earthquake really, really strong? Isn't the wind really, really strong? That's so much stronger than we could ever be pushing on this wall. And that's what we do as structural engineers is, we make sure this wall doesn't fall down when the wind starts blowing really, really hard, or the earth starts shaking really, really hard. And it seems to really resonate with them really well, just to jump into that conversation of what is structural engineering? What do you do? Now, of course, that might not work out as well for older kids, but again, for the younger kids, that really seems to resonate well. Okay, it looks like we're closing in on time. So again, guys, I greatly appreciate everybody's participation. If you're interested in hearing more, or would just love to sit in or provide some more input, we meet as the S&E task force on the 2nd Thursday of every other month. And so our next one is actually going to be in May. And so we'd love to have you there, share your experiences, or just sit there and hear what some of the other experiences are and the great resources we have. Thank you guys again.